Okay, cool. Yeah, to people watching this, this is my friend Daniel. And I've talked with him a number of times about some of his thinking about some philosophical stuff, and he's got some takes that seem pretty good that I haven't seen elsewhere. And so I keep wanting to encourage him to get his ideas out there. And we figured that having a conversation with me could be a way to do that. So that's what we're up to. And Yeah. Um, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, so I don't know, I've just been kind of writing up this one idea that I have. It's kind of like hmm, a psychological model of attention, which I want it to be kind of like a map into like some deeper philosophy, um, some like phenomenology, some ontology, and like also some stuff with regards to like meditation. And something that I wanted specifically with this map is to like be very explicit in that it's a map and show why in it being a map it has like a certain sort of fundamental inadequacy
Hmm.
and like kind of at least gesture at how to like fold up the map and put it in your pocket so that you can like behold the territory and start going exploring.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've written a thing. I'll try to not just like read off of it. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. And I think I'll like try to take some notes if interesting conversation comes up.
Cool. Yeah.
So yeah, kind of the core thing is that things sit in our attention, and not just like, we're paying attention to certain things or not. They sit in our attention in a particular way. So for example, um, some of you might notice that this stuff is like fairly uh, inspired by Heidegger. So I'm going to use the example of a hammer,
Hmm.
as is tradition. Um, so, for example, like let's say you've got your toolbox with your hammer in it, and you're like building, let's say building a house, and you need to drive nails. The hammer is just kind of like sitting there as an affordance to drive nails when you need it. You'll kind of just like reach towards it and grab it without really thinking about it. And then when you're like hammering with it, it just kind of becomes an extension of your hand. It's like barely sitting there in your attention, but like as an affordance, as an extension of your hand to drive nails, that kind of like muscle memory. Um, that's like kind of just hmm, how you're attending to the hammer insofar as you're attending to it at all. You're mostly attending to the nails and to whatever you're driving the nails into. Um, But now suppose you have another situation. Let's say it's lunchtime and you're sitting around, um, and the wind is blowing and you don't want it to fly away. So you're like looking around and there's a heavy object there, your hammer. You pick it up and you put it down on a paper bag. So like in the first, it's this like tool, this affordance to drive nails. In the second, it's this just heavy thing to weigh down a bag.
Hmm.
Um, and then say you're a kid playing with your magnets. You're playing with magnets. Your dad has handed you like a bunch of things to play with. Use the magnet on. You like pick up the hammer and place the magnet on it, and whoa, like the magnet is attracted to the head, but it's not to the handle. That's neat.
Hmm. Right, right.
And like here, let's say, um, you're going around, you're sticking your magnet on a fridge. There's a sense in which like the fridge is the same kind of a thing as the hammer in this context of playing around with the magnet.
Right. Like thing that the magnets will stick to.
Yeah. Whereas like if you're building a house, the fridge and hammer are kind of different.
Yeah, not gonna work very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And my last example is like you and your friends are sitting around in armchairs. You observe the hammer there upon the table. What is this really? Ah, it is but a pattern of quantum fields, which photons reflect off of into our retinas, sending neural signals to our brains, where we ultimately project the categorization of hammer onto it or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so there, it's sitting in our attention as what I like to call a philosophical object, where you're like doing philosophy and you're like taking some object as an example.
Right.
Um, for continentals, it's a hammer. For analytics, it's a chair or a table. Or
Right, the canonical philosophical object. In my house, it's often the cat.
nice. Um, I had a good philosophical conversation with some friends at a restaurant. And then I think we ordered some appetizer that came on a cutting board. Um, and that cutting board was our philosophical object. And my
Nice.
friend was just so like attached by the cutting to the cutting board by the end of it that he just straight up like asked the waiter like, could I just like pay you $20 to take this cutting board home? And
What
so
a way to say.
he's like, yeah, sure, I don't care. So we walked out with cutting board and
Amazing.
it's still sitting in his apartment.
Does he use it as a cutting board or just a philosophical
Uh,
object?
I'm pretty sure it's like it's sort of the place of presentation.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah.
This rock here is also a philosophical object.
Nice. Yeah. When you bring up that thing about philosophical object and the like the what is it really question, I'm reminded of a bunch of our previous conversations. One thing we could try to do is like have me try to reflect back to you what I think you think about this hypothetical situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, which is actually, I mean, and again, this is part of why I'm excited about drawing your ideas out and sharing them with the world is because they've influenced me as well. Like when I
Mm.
if I heard not you tell me such a thing, I would have you-shaped uh critiques of that assessment of what's going on.
Mm.
Um, so so yeah, does that sound good?
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so if somebody was like, okay, so what is this really? You know, it's a bunch of atoms of, you know, metal and you know, wood atom, you know, that are all here and then like it's we're seeing it via the photons of whatever. So there's a there's one issue there which is sort of hidden in the word really. Like what is this
Mm.
really? Um and which is sort of like part of the issue there is you're sort of you're supposing that there is only one answer to what is it really, and that the answer is sort of implicitly supposed to be decontextualized, but in fact ends up getting confused with a particular contextual answer, which is sort of a context that likes to claim that it's contextless, which is the study of physics.
Mhm.
Um, and in reductionistic worldviews that say that everything reduces down to physics, you get this idea that physics is the most real. Um, but what I've learned from you is that it makes a lot more sense when you understand something like to what question is anything an answer to? Like what question is actually being asked here? And the answer, this is, you know, made of atoms and we, you know, we're seeing it via photons reflecting off it or whatever, is a good answer to a different question than what is this really?
Mhm.
And the question is something like if we try to investigate what this is made of, what are the sort of smallest units of analysis that we can find for what this is made of, and various other questions that one way or another fall under the purview of physics, then we will get answers like, oh, it's made of atoms, right? Like, you know, and okay, well, what are the atoms made of? Well, we used to think that didn't have an answer. Turns out it does, and then turns out that electrons and so forth are also made of something in some sense, although the word made of starts to mean different things, but it was at least from an intuitive perspective, we were inclined to use the word made of all the way down, even though the meaning kind of changed.
Mhm.
Um, because there was a type of question that we were asking, and the type of question sort of did stay the same, even though the specifics of the question changed. Um, and the question that we were asking was essentially a reductionistic question. A What are the components of this hammer or this whatever else? Um, but that eh, but that like physics is just one domain, and
Mhm.
and you pointed out to me something funny about how like almost at no moments in most people's lives does the idea that things are made of atoms, like, is that the sort of most useful or relevant way to conceive of something?
Yeah.
And that's been like slightly blowing my mind since you said it. Anyway, so there's like most, I think, of my kind of like my take now on this like scene with the like sitting around talking about this philosophical object of a hammer. Is that right? Does that match kind of your take on this? And what am I missing?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go in a bit of a different direction. There's like specifically the critique with respect to like using science in this way and like physics in particular. Um, so another thing that I would say is this question of what is it really? I think I'll dig down into why one might be tempted to ask this question, but I think the question itself is like mistaken. There's kind of an implicit doubt in there. This like there's this it's
Mm.
not it's not it's not actually it's not really a hammer.
Oh, so the what is this really you're saying is starting from the place of assuming for some reason that it can't simply really be a hammer.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, um I think I'll skip over that part in my notes. Um so yeah, I'll get back to the stream of this and think I can get to the question of like yeah, um I have a note about like what is it really, just a few points down.
Cool.
Um so just a few things. First, with this thing sitting our attention, no particular thing needs to be sitting in our attention. Um, that's, I think that that can be like pretty obvious, or I think that that's pretty obvious. Like you're not attending to your toothbrush right now, for example.
Right. Until I
Um,
was.
yeah, or like until I said this
Yeah. Yeah.
sentence to you.
Until you said it.
Yeah. Um, but I think this is important, specifically when talking about the self,
Ah. Right. Right.
which
Right.
would,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm excited if we're gonna go into a bunch of that stuff.
yeah, we can get to that later. Um, and then in addition to like what is sitting in our attention, nothing needs to be sitting in our attention in any particular way. So like the hammer
Okay.
as is like affordance for hammering, um, like it doesn't need to be sitting that way. Like when you're sitting back as a considering it as a philosophical object, it's not really sitting in your attention in that way. And if you're like hammering and then you like consider, ah, yes, this semblance of quantum fields in my hand.
Yeah.
Like this is like going to kind of distract you from what's going on and like screw with your ability to hammer nails. Um, Now there is like to some extent a bit of a compositionality here in that like you can kind of attend to it in one way and like attend to it in another way. And if they're like simple enough, if it's easy enough, like you can kind of fuse those together. Like if hammering is just like really easy, just whacking away, you can kind of like consider what's going on here, reflect on like how you're doing it, or like,
Right. Like I have memories of like after I did my first term of engineering. I went and was doing a like an internship that I thought was going to have more technical stuff, but ended up being mostly just working in a factory, which was also interesting. Um, but one of the things that I found myself doing was when I was carrying these like long extrusions of metal, I would be noticing the like where the center of gravity was and like the amount of force I had to push. And so I was like noticing a bunch of principles from the physics course I had just taken
Mm-hmm.
months earlier. Um, but again, as you say, a kind of like part of why I was able to do that is because it was very easy. Like there was like,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm walking from here to there, it's like I don't need to be relating to this object at all in any particular like task relevant way because just holding it is all I'm doing. Like it's all I
Mm-hmm.
need to do while I walk from one end of the factory to the other or whatever.
Yeah, and there seems to be like a function of gaining muscle memory and skill that's about like making it so you don't really have to pay it, like about minimizing our attention, or like the amount of attention that we need to pay to things.
Yeah,
Like you don't have to pay basically any attention at all to walking.
right.
Um, but like walking is pretty complicated, skillful task.
Totally. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I guess one point I should add here is that like we are very efficient with our attention. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like
Would you say very like kind of judicious,
yeah,
like kind of sparing? Like,
yeah, like
yeah.
if we don't need to pay attention to a thing, then we won't pay attention to
Mhm.
something. Um,
Hang on. Am I gonna need this in the real? Is this gonna be on the test?
um, sure.
Well, no, but like that's the same
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
right? It's like, do I need to
yeah,
pay
yeah,
attention
yeah,
to this? Right? Like that's the same move.
yeah, yeah, I see.
I was just I was
Yeah,
performing
yeah,
it
yeah,
rather
yeah,
than
I
just
got it.
pointing at it. But
But it will be on the test.
very important. Okay.
It's very important. Um, we efficient with um yeah, so like if we don't need to pay attention to a thing, then like we won't pay attention to it. And this is important because like um I feel like so one of my very general principles about philosophy is like when evaluating like a philosophy, what does it like do to you? Um, I think is an important question. Like, and is a philosophy doing good things? I think a lot of philosophies implicitly ask you to like pay attention to more things or to pay attention to things
Mm-hmm.
in particular ways, in ways that are like just basically asking for a whole bunch of overhead. Um, in a way that like I think just doesn't actually well, I think whenever a philosophy asks that, then that philosophy is impossible, essentially, because you're not going to be able to fight your habits of like very efficiently just throwing stuff
Right, right.
out.
That's a really interesting point. Like it's like the if a philosophy allows you to notice things which sort of are immediately relevant and useful, then like the philosophy is sort of paying its rent. But if the
Mhm.
philosophy demands these things are relevant, and then like you look at them and they don't bear fruit like almost immediately,
Yeah.
then they're sort of failing at being relevant, actually.
Mhm.
And then you can kind of like cuck yourself with this philosophy and be like, but I sure reasoned myself into thinking that I should find these things salient and interesting. And it's like who who sowed all that doubt in your own salience landscape such that you think you're supposed to do it manually? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's kind of what these like physicalist worldviews are kind of doing. They're like, at least in certain contexts, the way you have to pay attention to this is you have to be um, like attending to what it's made out of, because that's what it really is.
mm,
like in the philosophical context, when like what is it really like, you have to be attending to it in this particular way in terms of like whatever theories of physics, rather than in whatever way that's relevant, that's like normal
Right,
relevant.
interesting. And would you say that like pretty much every totalizing worldview does this? Because it's like I could see ways in which like, people who are like extremely, you know, whatever manosphere pilled or alt-right whatever, or like seeing everything in terms of power dynamics and gender or whatever, or like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um or people who, see everything through the lens of like, why communism is good.
yeah, yeah. Or effective altruist utilitarians of like,
Right.
how does this like contribute to like my utility function? Everything, like, all my entire life has to be oriented around um this like particular utility calculus, and
Yeah, interesting.
how to like maximize this.
So it's like there's an error some worldviews make, you might say some
Mhm.
philosophies, which is that they imply that certain things are supposed to always be relevant.
Yeah. And so I think this is like particularly an issue because if something is sitting in your attention in one way, because of our limited bandwidth, that prevents it from sitting in our attention in other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this is where it gets to this, like, what is it really? I think there's this interesting thing where we mistake this phenomenon of like um, sitting in our attention in one way instead of another, as like we mistake that for negation. So if it's like this, then it is not like that, rather than it is like this, and it also is like that. But like this way is what's kind of absorbing all of my attention here. So specifically what I think is going on with like, what is it really? It is really some like quantum fields or something like that. Um, you pay attention to it in this particular way, and it reveals a bunch of things to you, or really, I think it gives an illusion of revealing a bunch of things to you. Um, and like by virtue of it kind of doing that, it's kind of and pushing the other ways of attending to it
Mm.
out. It's like um, like this is like the actual way of looking at it because I can see certain things here and not there. It's kind of like, so yeah, like it is like made of these atoms, so it is not a hammer, or it's not actually a hammer. Like maybe you'll do something like, oh, in conventional speech, we would say it is a hammer, but really that's um
Yeah,
like
so, so
a
just
cipher for what's really going on or something.
right. It's a shorthand or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when you say it reveals, or rather it has the illusion of revealing, I just want to confirm there. In general, some ways of seeing things differently do reveal something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're claiming about scientific reductionism in particular that a lot of what it seems to reveal is actually sort of illusory. Like you don't actually get a phenomenologically useful result out of like if I like pick up this banana peel and I'm like, leaving aside the really part for now, if I just like attempt to attend to it as being made of atoms, that doesn't really do anything for me,
Yeah.
I guess. Whereas if I attend to it of like, what could I do with this? I
Mhm.
get like, I could try to slip somebody on it. I could wear it as a hat, although that'd be kind of gross. I could try to eat it. I've never considered really trying to eat a banana peel. Doesn't sound pleasant, but I could bite it. It's like mildly satisfying as a texture to just kind of bite into. Um, so like, that's what could I do with it? And then there's like, if I ask like, you know, what does it look like such that if I were to use it in like a collage, like it would make a useful kind of, I'm like, oh, I could actually make a kind of a yellow flower out of it, right? By like, arranging. So it's like I can get sort of those affordances. If I were trying to ask, can I burn it? Now I need to sort of know something about how fire works, which does not require, as I think you pointed out to me at one point, like does not require knowing about atoms, but it does require knowing something about like it's kind of moist, so it probably won't burn very well unless
Mhm.
I dry it out first, right? But nowhere in that description requires atoms.
Yeah.
Um, if I were trying to ask, could I get the water out of it? For some purpose, right? Let's suppose I'm thirsty or I don't know. Then I guess I could try to like evaporate the water out and like catch it. That would be one way, like because if I dry it in the sun, but if I dry it like in a closed environment that's somehow going to capture the water, that'd be one way to get the water out. Beyond that, I'm not sure, right? But I still didn't need to invoke atoms there. And there might come a
Yeah.
point in my asking those types of questions where I would eventually encounter like atoms as kind of relevant somehow. Um, and even as I was starting to ask about, evaporating the water out, I'm already slightly thinking in terms of something like conservation laws, which, implicitly, if the water leaves this, it's got to go somewhere, right? So I'm like starting to reason in terms of things that are kind of close to atoms, but I didn't start there. I
Mhm.
got there because I had a question, like a pragmatic question.
Yeah.
And I didn't get the pragmatic question by being like, consider atoms or consider quantum flux or whatever else. Quantum flux,
Mhm.
I have even less use for. Like, what does that even mean? And
Yeah.
so that's the kind of thing you're pointing at. Like nothing is actually revealed usually by the lens of scientific materialism. Um,
Mhm.
huh. I have another question related to that though, which is like, so like sometimes like I had a phase where I thought reductionism was good. I was like, reductionism, yes. And then I read Stuart Kaufman's Reinventing the Sacred, and with quite a lot of difficulty, I was able to go, okay, you're claiming to have not just a non-reductionistic stance, but a post-reductionistic stance. I'm very tentatively listening. Very cool book, by the way. I recommend it to you and also anybody who's finding this conversation interesting. Um, and so I was reading that book, Post Reduction, right? But like reductionism does successfully avoid making certain kinds of errors.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, insofar as using a reductionistic lens is feels like it reveals something, if it has something to do with like the it constructs an illusion, but maybe that illusion dispels other illusions that people have,
Yeah.
and maybe that's why it seems helpful.
Yeah. Definitely like a lot of materialism comes from a place of like not like wanting basically a general purpose way of dispelling like a lot of woo stuff that they don't want
Mm-hmm.
to deal with and a lot of religious stuff that they don't want to deal with. Um, and
Right.
like I think that that's so the issue is that it like it does dispel a whole bunch of that stuff because of this like nature of attending it in one way conceals all the other ways of attending to it. Um, but like it also throws out so much more. Like
Yeah.
I think it's like a nuclear option when you can do something more nuanced with all the woo stuff. I think also just I think there's something kind of messed up culturally where you kind of have to have like a justification, like a logical reason to like not want to deal with something in a certain way. It's
Mm.
like you need to have a scientific justification for like not wanting to get into the astrology of uh that like your like sister is getting into or whatever. And it's just like I don't know. I think we should be like a bit more okay with just saying like, no, I don't want to get into this, or like I'm not really interested in this topic. And if like people push you on that, then just like, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think it does function like pretty powerfully to dispel a lot of this stuff.
Hmm.
But like I mean one of the reasons why I don't like it is because um it just goes like way too far in it. There's a lot of stuff that I want to pay attention. Specifically, like there's a lot of stuff in my own personal experience of things that is just like um not really legible to science because like science does not really use your body as an instrument for measuring things. And therefore
Mhm.
like your body is an instrument for or your body as like something that can like sense the world is just kind of totally illegible to
Mhm.
science. Um, like the way that science gets access to that is by a um, a doctor or um, a scientist administering a questionnaire to you, asking you about how you feel. Like that's how scientists understand. Well, not entirely, but like
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
lot of how science understands feeling. There's also, I mean, there's also going to be like watching for reactions and that kind of stuff, but it's mostly going to be like,
Galvanic skin response.
yeah.
Measure stress levels.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I'm piecing together here, and I'm curious if this gets at the thing you want to say about like how, the self doesn't have to sit in our attention, but it's like when you when you name the thing about like utilitarianism as an example of a worldview that sort of implies something's always supposed to be relevant. um you said something like, how is this relevant to my utility function, right? It was like the
Hmm.
hypothetical. But it seems like there is a sense, and maybe let me know if you see it otherwise, but it seems to me like there is a sense in which I am always relevant to me. Like I'm not relevant to you, but insofar as like I'm going to like have something that is ongoingly relevant, like me, seems like a good answer to that. But that's different from the self or my identity. It's some
Yeah.
more basic thing, which comes back to your speaking to like the value of seeing this guy as this guy.
Hmm.
Like I refers to, this guy. It's like not some like thing I identify with or something.
Yeah. Um, Sorry, I kind of had a little bit of my own thought about that. Um,
Yeah.
so so one distinction I want to make is I think there's a difference between like totalizing versus universal in some sense, where it's like you can ask like, how do I relate to this about anything? And
Hmm.
that's kind of like universal, but not, or like if you acknowledge that like things can sit in your attention in multiple ways and you don't have to
Hmm.
attend it in any particular way, um, like well, all of these totalizing things I think can be like brought down to something that's universal. You can always consider like how whatever I'm doing can be thought of in terms of utility. You
Right.
can
You always
always,
can do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
you always have the option of like, at least for like, um, well, for basically anything, you can ask like, how does this relate to the material? How does this relate to like things that I can um,
Right.
interact with like the tools of physics and engineering and stuff? Um, or you can ask like, what is this made out of? Um,
Mhm.
although although that question can get like pretty weird in some contexts, like um, that weird buzzing feeling in my hand. What is that made out of?
Right, right, right.
What is personal space made out of?
Yeah.
So like you can do the more nuanced materials thing of like how does personal space like causally relate to some kind of matter, which
Mm,
is not necessarily asking like what does it matter, but you can like
right,
talk
right.
about um like people's perception, body language, and
Yeah.
maybe bring up brains or something like that. But it's like that is one possibly useful way of looking at things. It just becomes totalizing when it's like this is the only way,
Hmm.
or like this is the best way,
Or the most real
or
way.
or yeah, this is the most real, the most true way.
Right. I'm suddenly struck by like the word total, uh meaning all at once, entire, uh whole altogether. And it's um like what makes the thing total is that it's claiming to be everything at once and it's not. Or like what makes it totalizing is that it is making an allness out of something that's not an allness.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, like in that way is actually a very good word. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's like so getting towards some of the more like ontology stuff. So there, I've been making kind of implicitly this distinction of like what fits in your attention, the way things sit in your
Mhm.
attention, actually to not get into the ontology stuff. And it's just and like um there's it's like all things are this thing or this type of thing. Hmm. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I want to make this point. I don't know. Ignore that, I guess. But I have this kind of visual of like these kind of like universal things. I'm not sure if universal is necessarily the word that I want to use, but
Mhm.
like the things that like we're totalizing, but you're now treating in like um a looser way. I see it as like you have this whole like vast space of reality, and like these ways of attending are like rather thin tendrils that reach out into everything, but they don't fill up the space. They're just these tiny, thin
Mm.
little tendrils. And there's like so much more bulk to that whole space where
Mm.
like other systems of tendrils can fit in. And then also like some regions have like tendrils that only kind of land in that region but don't really go outside of it.
I found myself wondering, like the analogy I was going to use was something going to be something like it's like if you have 3D space, any point in it can be described with like an up-downness if we're using, let's say, Cartesian whatevers.
Mhm.
So any point within it can be described by an up-downness, but an up-downness is insufficient to fully describe it
Mm.
because it also has a left rightness and a forward backness, or it has a in outness and a radialness, right? Like
Mm.
you can
Mm.
both pick different sets of coordinate vectors that sort of can supersede or like replace each other, but also like you need enough of them. And in the actual kind of thing that we're talking about, it's not a 3D space. It's a sort of arbitrary, multi-dimensional, possibly non-Euclidean, I mean, certainly non-simply spatial kind of uh, region that you are attempting to describe in what phenomenological space, purpose space is a little trippy,
Uh,
right? And so it's like, talking about something in terms of utility functions is up-downness, and like that applies everywhere, but it's also just one dimension. Like, so it's
yeah.
simultaneously only a point if you look at it head on, but also simultaneously fills everything.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So you were talking earlier, you were bringing up the self, and you um do we want to go in that direction, or do I want to try and figure out how to go through more of this stuff that I have like written down?
Mm-hmm. Um, I'm open to either. If you have a desire to kind of get through what you've written, then I think that could be good.
Yeah, I have like a bunch of like just interesting bits and pieces, I think, to
Mhm.
throw out. And also I have a bit of a like we're still in the model kind of the attentional model.
Hmm.
So
I mean,
one
maybe it would be good to kind of get something resembling a complete description of the intentional model, because that's sort of where we started. And so maybe the self will come into that, maybe the other things will. I also would like to wrap in like 15 or something like that.
okay.
So
Um
maybe that won't be everything, but just I have another one
so
half hour. So
yeah, so the attentional model, I think I've basically given it. It's pretty simple. It's just like things sit in our attention, and then also they sit in our attention in like multiple different ways.
mhm.
And sitting in our attention in one way conceals other ways of sitting in our attention.
Yeah.
Um, so here's where it starts getting into like the map shows how the map um, is like somewhat inadequate, which is that like maybe I should have put this as an example of the hammers at the beginning. Um, but let me just make a note. Um, so when it comes to like introspection and stuff, there's a temptation, especially to describe phenomenology as the study of your experience. Um, and the issue I think with that is that like something sitting in your attention as something that you are experiencing is one particular way
Is
for something
already
to
a
be.
way of conceiving of it.
Yeah, it's a
Right,
way
right, right, right.
for it to be sitting in your
Oh,
attention.
okay. I think I see what you mean when you said like you want the map to eat itself or something.
Yeah. So so in particular, something sitting in your attention as something which is sitting in your attention is sitting in your attention in a particular way.
Right, right,
In
right, right.
particular, as something which is sitting in your attention in some way.
Right.
And so, like, insofar as the hammer is something which is sitting in your attention in a particular way, it is not like the like extension of your hand at the back of your attention as this like easy affordance to drive nails.
Hmm.
Um, and phenomenology, what I want it to be is um, a way of like familiarizing yourself with all the different ways, like as much as possible, all the different ways that things can sit in your attention.
Right. Only
Um,
one of which is as a philosophical object that's an example of something sitting in your attention.
yes. Maybe I should add it specifically as like another example of a philosophical object.
Right, 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 right. It's like, and here we are,
Yeah.
right, right, because that's a different type of philosophical object, in a
Yeah.
sense. Phenomenological object,
Yeah.
ontological object.
Oh yeah, I should definitely do the like as meta at the end of the examples for the hammer.
Right. You can say, now
Um,
imagine that I had a hammer here the whole time while we were talking about this. You would now be having an experience or something. I don't know.
yeah. So, right. It's interesting that I put that in there before the other part. Um, yeah, so like that picture of phenomenology, I think is like that's the thing that I'm going for. But like once you do that like flip from the map of the way things are sitting in your attention to like um actually somehow reflecting on things um to get access to that in some way. Um I think if you like really get into that, that leads to like this like big perspective flip,
Hmm.
um, in a way that's like kind of hard to describe. So, in particular, um, like language is a way that modifies a way to modify what is sitting in our attention and the way it does so.
Hmm.
Um, and so like I can talk to you about the hammer at like ways the hammer is sitting in your attention, and that will modify your attention on the hammer to like be something which is sitting in your attention in a particular way.
Hmm.
But how do I get at the other ways of it sitting in your attention, like linguistically? How do I talk about it? I mean, I've already talked about it, like the hammer is an extension of your hand. When I say the hammer is an extension of your hand, I'm not saying um, it is uh, like it is sitting in your attention as something which is an extension of your hand.
Right. There's a removal of the like of the self and of the isness there. Is that what you're getting at?
Mhm.
Um, you're um you're simply conjuring it in a way. Like
Mhm.
you are enacting a real sense of things, or you're realizing a sense of things. Yeah. Maybe we can unpack a little bit more what that means, because I'm repeating back to you phrases I've heard you say, which is like the difference between like um uh if I want to try to get really humble about things, I might say like, you know, look at this thing that looks like a banana. But then I could get even more humble and be like, look at this thing that looks to me like a banana. But then I could get even more absurdly kind of over the top about this and be like, the voice that is coming out of the being that I seem to refer to as me would like to make something that it would like to call an inquiry to the being that it perceives might be on the other end of this, that it would like to call you, uh, about whether or not it is the case that when you do something that you might call perceiving, hopefully you understand what I mean by that, of this thing which we might call, like, Jesus Christ, like, there's a bunch of absurd self-inserting and non-removal of perspective there,
Mhm.
which is very valuable to do if you get in a really subtle, weird conversation with somebody about a personal blind spot that they're like systematically avoiding. And that's one of the things that I've been researching in relation to all of my stuff on trust and perspectives and stuff like that. But
Mhm.
as you've been pointing out, there's also like something really valuable about being able to just say like, "Yo, check out this banana peel,"
Yeah.
and I can just let all of I can let the me who's saying it and the you who's hearing it and the isness of the banana peel be all just sort of presumed, and
Yeah.
that is like appropriate for many contexts to leave that removed. And so part of what you're getting at here, I think, is something about how we are constantly directing each other to perceive things
Mhm.
in particular ways, to have things sit in our attention in particular ways.
Yeah. An example I like to use is pass the salt.
Right. You don't
It's
have to
just
say
like
pass the object, which I sure hope continues to contain salt like it did earlier. Like,
yeah, or like yeah, and unrelatedly, I also like the example because it's not like changing the way the salt sits in your attention so much as it's just like doing something to you. It's like you don't pause and consider, should I pass the salt? Let's decide
mhm.
on passing the salt. It's just like, oh, salt, here you go.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Like we are all capable of mind control.
right. Yeah.
Don't think of a pink elephant. Yeah, so in all of this, we're at the point where like I want to switch from like talking about the model to like talking about um or like talking about the map to talking about the territory, and this is always where it gets hard.
Mm.
Um,
Well, let's give it a shot. See
I
where we get
think,
to it.
yeah, I think I need a good example to go through about where it gets weird. I guess one example I could go through that we've talked about before is uh like fallibility. Um or just like being wrong about things. But sorry, let me just like look at my notes for a second. Talked about that. Um, so yeah, something I just want to point out is like, yeah, simple statements of being. Like this is a banana. Like there are some particularly simple ways that things consider in our attention. Um, like this banana peel is sitting in my attention in a particular way. That's a pretty complicated way for the banana peel to sit in your attention, but just say like, hey, check out this banana peel. That's quite simple. Or like, this is a banana peel. That's quite simple. In comparison, like in particular, you're not by saying like this is sitting in my attention in a particular way, you're bringing yourself forward and relating the banana peel to yourself. So it's not just the banana peel that's there, it's you as well. Um, and you're put into relation. So um, when it comes to philosophy, at least, a lot of people are very concerned about like what is true, what is real, what exists. Um, at least when it comes to like metaphysics, epistemology, that kind of stuff. Um, and I think that what's more important, because it shows up way more often, is what is and the way that things are. So like with a banana peel, like this is a banana peel. I didn't talk about like this banana peel exists, it's real. I didn't say it is true that this is banana peel. It's just
Right,
this
right.
is a banana peel. Like, what is the meaning of this is? Or what is the meaning of being more generally? Where by just being, I mean like literally just um various forms of that word, like to be, am, is, are,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
being. So this is why I think it's like a large focus of philosophy should be focused on being in a way that I've like I don't know, at least in our spaces, I've not seen anyone but myself do it. And in philosophy, like there's the Heideggerians that do it. There's some like other weird philosophers, but like
Mhm.
um the philosophy and the philosophers that like most people are aware of, especially in our scene, don't do that. And also weirdly, a lot of the people who call themselves Heideggerians aren't interested in like the question of being.
Mm.
Um, yeah, so that's like, I don't know why this emphasis
Yeah.
on being. And then to get into the example of being wrong about things, the example I like to use is like, um, suppose you're like in uh an unfamiliar kitchen and there's like a glass jug on the table and someone is like, yo, can you hand me that jug? And you go and reach the jug and you wrap your hand around it and like, whoa, that doesn't feel right. You pick it up, it's super light. It feels warm and has this like sort of like tackiness. And it's like, this is not a glass jug. This is actually a plastic jug.
Mhm.
Um, and then from here, the way we normally talk about it is, of course, this never was a glass jug. This is a plastic jug. It just always has been a plastic jug. Um, I just thought it was a glass jug.
Right, but it's more accurate to say it showed up in your experience as a glass jug.
Yeah. So
It
like
was a glass jug as far as you could tell.
it was a glass jug as far as so So my point here is we don't have the language to talk about the phenomenology. Like we don't have the language to talk about the phenomenology in a way that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
so like so in particular, um, it is for most purposes adequate to say I thought it was a glass jug.
Right.
Um, but the issue with that for phenomenology is like if we go back to that context um, and let's say you had some good reason to describe the jug to someone. It's like,
You wouldn't say, look at that, which I think is a glass jug.
yeah, yeah. Can you hand me let's say there's like a bunch of jugs on the table and it's like and you want someone to hand you that one. Um, you wouldn't be like, can you hand me the thing that appears to me to be a glass jug? Can you
Right.
hand me the thing
Right.
that I think is a
It
glass
was in
jug?
that moment simply showing up in this
Yeah.
removed way, this withdrawn way, as a glass jug.
Yeah. You say like in that context, hey, can you pass me the glass jug? Um,
Right. You're actually
and then
emphasizing its glassness, which,
yeah.
yeah.
And so, and in particular, we can't also say that it was a glass jug because it wasn't. Because like when we say things like it was a glass jug or I thought it was a glass jug, these are always made in the context right now of when we're speaking, not the context back then. Um,
Yeah. I'm really glad that we got to this because this was, when I remember, we met at that party a couple years ago, and I was like, hey, I hear you have interesting philosophy that, you haven't been able to express to people. Can you philosophize at me? And you did. And this is one of the places that we got to, and it struck me as compelling since then. And it's part of what I've been hoping to draw out of you. So I'm really glad that we got to it. And I remember being struck at the time, both, yes, we do not have words for this. And B, I think you and I also got at the fact that this causes issues around understanding like intent and blame and stuff like that, like responsibility, because it's
mm,
like
mm,
it's like, well, everything everybody does makes sense at the point when they do it to whatever
yeah.
part of them is doing it. Like there might be another part that's screaming like, no, this is a bad idea, but that part's just like not in control and therefore not sufficiently affecting what is being done. And so it's like, you know, it's like to take a trivial example, it's like, if someone goes like, well, why did you call it a glass jug then if it wasn't a glass jug? It's like, well, I thought it was a glass jug at the time, but it's not just I thought it was a glass jug, it just was a glass jug. Like,
Mm,
as I experienced it, right? We can sort of add that perspectival kind of
yeah.
suffix, and that makes it at least a little bit more clear that what we're talking about is not merely a thought, not merely a propositional is a glass jug, but a
Mm,
phenomenological is a glass jug, and that isness is right there in phenomenology.
mhm.
Um, yeah, yeah. I'm curious. So maybe part of, well, I have a few thoughts from here. Well, I've been working on a post recently, which I hope to get up soon, which is a 2x2 where I try to talk about having simultaneously like maximum humility and maximum confidence. I'm not sure that that's quite the thing uh to call it. I like to call each of those dimensions, but it's something like maximum owningness of the fact that my perspective is mine and not yours, like that it is my perspective, and also maximum like uh like actually making contact with isness or something.
Mm,
And um and in the example that I use here, um I often um in the example I have in the post, uh the phrase that I have multiple variations on is some variant of you're trying to screw me over. And the highly confident making contact version that is not humble is just you're trying to screw me over, right? It's an
mhm.
accusation. It's very
Yeah.
And then there's something like, oh, I have a story that you're trying to screw me over, which is sort of like I'm owning it's my perspective, but now I'm not even attempting to make contact anymore. And then there's something like, I think you're trying to screw me over, which is like the think is sort of half making contact, but it's a think. It's not like a phenomenological statement, right? Like it's not a statement of isness.
Mm.
And so it seems to me that part of the same puzzle, like in this sort of trade-off, and I have a 2 by 2. I can describe the other um diagonal in a moment, but in the along this current diagonal where it feels like a trade-off, it feels like this is a similar problem to the point that you're making, which is that there's a desire to say, well, I thought it was as a sort of compromise, but it's like there's something else going on there. Does that feel to you like kind of the same issue or like a related issue?
I think the I think that is a little bit different from the I thought it was a glass jug. 'Cause like with the glass jug, or rather the plastic jug, it's like I thought it was this, and now we know that I was
Right.
wrong about
Now
that.
we know.
Yeah.
And part and in the example that I'm using, the contrast isn't temporal, it's between my perspective and your perspective. Because I
Yeah,
might say you're
yeah.
trying to screw me over and you say you're not. And so it's like, how do we deal with that tension? But it feels
Hmm.
like it's sort of a similar puzzle. It's like, how do we deal with it's not just I have a notion that you're trying to screw me over. It's that in fact, my experience of the world involves this shape, which has a
Hmm.
screwiness that I actively need to defend from in order to remain in sane relationship with my environment. And yet, maybe you're not. But also, like,
Hmm.
you are, as far as I can tell. But, like, if I just say that and you don't think you are, then, like, we're going to have a hard time syncing up about anything.
Yeah. Something that I think is like also kind of partially, but like not wholly getting the thing is like I'm trying to avoid being screwed over,
Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
which is like weirdly just completely not acknowledging the other person, but
Yeah.
it's like owning like entirely what I guess it's not being indirect about what you're doing, it's just being incomplete.
Right. And the thing is, it's not making a bid for a shared sense of things. Like, it's like, can we get the situation sitting in our shared attention in a way? Here's maybe a way to put it. So in this screw me over example, there's like, can we get the situation sitting in our shared attention in such a way that it is sitting in our attention the same way? And if I just say you're trying to screw me over and you're like, no, I'm not, then we don't have a shared attentional object um,
Hmm.
of like the situation. We may have a shared attentional object of banana peels and whatever else, but like there's something about the screwing thing, whatever. Okay, so then with the jug, it's like maybe the question is, can we get this fucking jug to sit in our shared attention in such a way that it could also be in the shared attention of the me from 2 minutes ago who thought it was made of
Yeah, yeah,
glass.
yeah.
It's like there's how do I if I say is a plastic jug not a glass jug, then that sort of fails to accommodate that like that perspective. But if I say thought it was that still doesn't accommodate. I have to say was, but was implies a thing that doesn't fit with my current perspective.
Hmm.
Um anyway, I do want to hop off in a couple minutes at a very high level, and we can explore this more later or not or whatever. But my sort of partial solution to this, in some cases, is the admittedly rather cumbersome um, and more relevant to the screw me over thing. I don't trust that you're not trying to screw me over.
Hmm.
And what I like about that is it's it's fully owning. I don't trust that you're not trying to screw me over. So it's not saying like you you are, but it's also like here's what's going on. It's not just that I have a story over here. I don't trust that you're not trying to screw me over. It somehow feels more full contact. And I think likewise, we could say that jar that I trusted was glass Now, in this case, I didn't get screwed over by that trusting, but
Yeah.
there was still nonetheless a sense of this jar that I at the time trusted was glass and now trust is plastic. And that feels better, maybe?
Hmm. I do
Like,
like the I don't trust that you're not trying to screw me over, but I'm a little bit confused about like the way to apply this to the jug situation.
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I came up with like a really awkward grammatical mode of shows being. Um
Of what?
shows being this shows being a glass jug, I think is like true in both contexts. I don't the way I define it, which I haven't
Yeah.
defined it here, is like true in both contexts. Um, and in
Are you
particular,
saying chose like make a choice?
no, no,
Oh,
shows,
shows being. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and also I
So it
think
showed. So, wait, so how would you say that in this situation?
um the jug shows being made of glass. Um,
But is it the case that it
it's
showed being made of glass and now it
yeah,
shows being made of plastic?
it showed being made of glass. Um, it's similar to appears to be this like the jug appears to be made of glass, which I think is true in both contexts. The issue being that maybe it's just like the way we've used these and built up kind of like cultural context around them is that appears to be is always a statement of doubt
Right. Yeah.
or yeah, a statement of uncertainty at least.
Totally.
It's like you have to have some reason to bring that up in that way. So
Right.
like,
And that's part of what we're dealing with in the first place. And
yeah,
one of the things I say about the convolutedness of the phrase, I don't trust that you're not trying to screw me over. It's like, isn't that a bit indirect? It's like, or isn't that a bit complicated? And the thing I say is it's no more complicated than the situation that you're in.
yeah,
Like, and I think that that is actually true here. It's like once you know, if I say like, hey, check out this orange peel, and you're like, what? Like, you're not gonna. You might say that's not an orange peel, but you might also say that doesn't look like an orange peel to me. And the reason why you're now self-inserting is because we have a difference in perspective. And so the reason why you might need to insert extra language to say to bridge between the perspective of me who knows it's made of plastic and me a minute ago who knew it was made of glass, you know, who knew it as being made of glass. That's another way to do it is to use as. But as being, I actually kind of like that.
as yeah, as can have like a little bit can have issues because it's like not really is.
Yeah, I mean, arguably is never as.
Yeah.
Or sorry, as it like arguably it always was as the whole time. Like all ises are
Mm,
ases.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, I think there might be some issues with like as instead of is,
Yeah.
but I don't have a good explanation
Yeah.
for that intuition off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree when I feel into it, but anyway, cool. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
great talking, and look forward to both more conversations about this and other things, and also seeing what people make of this. If you
Yeah.
are interested in if you're at home listening to this, or well, not at home, old TV phrase. Um, Anyway, let us know in the comments what you made of any of this. If you've got more questions for Daniel, or examples you think might be clarifying, if you've got suggestions for how we might phrase this weird conundrum with the formerly known as the jar formerly known as glass, then yeah, let us know. Language evolves. Sometimes we can do it slightly more intentionally. Cool.